I want to bring my panel in. It's a good one. Philip Rucker, an MSNBC political analyst and the White House bureau chief for The Washington Post. My friend Ron Insana, a CNBC contributor, and Evan Siegfried, a Republican strategist. Phil, to you first. I want to start with the new Washington Post ABC poll that says more than 6 in 10 Americans are blaming Congress and the president himself for not doing enough to prevent mass shootings. A spokesman for President Trump said he is open to improving background checks. But what sense are you actually getting from the White House? Is he going to follow through? I know he was with Don Jr. this week, and Don Jr., he's an NRA enthusiast.
Yeah, I think, Steph, there are competing pressures for President Trump. He views the NRA as critical, as a core part of his base that helped get him elected, and I think he's going to be very wary of crossing the NRA. But he also feels the political pressure to act, to do something. We know from our reporting over the weekend down in Florida that the president was watching a lot of television. He watched those teenagers on TV pleading with the adults in Washington to get something done. He also surveyed members down at Mar-a-Lago, his private club in Florida, about whether they think he should be championing more gun control. So I think he returned to Washington feeling that he needed to do something, that the pressure was real. I'm just not convinced that he's going to go very far.
He did watch those kids on TV. He visited Parkland, Florida. He also played golf over the weekend while they were teenagers. He sure did yesterday. They were teenagers who were buried on that very day. Ron, in the same poll, 58% of Americans say stricter gun laws could have prevented the shooting. Do you think there's enough momentum here? And I don't mean to be a cynic, but we've all been here before having this conversation.
Well, if there is enough momentum, it's going to come from this generation that has now seen this, far too many times. And to harken back to Vietnam, it was the voice of a generation, a youthful generation, that made their intentions known about that particular event in American history, and they fostered change. Now, I think obviously adults are going to have to be equally involved, if not more so, but the articulate nature of some of the comments coming from these young kids from Parkland who have been extraordinary in their descriptions of the types of change they want. I don't think they can let this movement go. They need to be as vocal and I think as persistent and consistent as their baby boomer predecessors when this protest really needs to gather enough storm to get adults to listen.
These young, articulate, extraordinarily strong young people who are now having their characters attacked by the far right, by Russian bots, which is stunning to me. But it's not just young people speaking out. Evan, we're actually seeing big GOP donors who are saying, you know what? You continue to do nothing on gun control, we're actually going to hold our dollars back. Are those kind of donors significant enough to make a difference? Because we know there are a lot of big politicians who love the support of the NRA.
No, they're not significant enough at this point because you've got to get the major mega donors, the Sheldon Adelsons and the Mercers, to get behind this. Philip actually mentioned how Donald Trump is polling members of Mar-a-Lago. We've had presidents who've had kitchen cabinets, never one that's had a country club cabinet. And the country club cabinet is basically saying, well, Mr. President, you're wonderful, and here's my latest plastic surgery. But they are not getting the pulse of what these kids are going through. If you actually go and now look at what the kids are going through, we have Trump surrogates this morning attacking them on another network, saying the left is really using them as political tools. We have conservative websites and conspiracy far-right websites saying that they're FBI plans.
The same kids who have been on television here. I saw them on with Chris Wallace, who, last I checked, is part of Fox News over the weekend.
But they're still being attacked. And you're going to see this filter back to the president because it will get to him through the conservative media he consumes. So he will move away. I am a pessimist on this. I may be a Second Amendment supporter, but I do believe we need to improve background checks. Heck, we should have a proficiency test if you want to own a gun, just like you can drive a car, because we shouldn't be having somebody who can't even wield a gun properly owning one. And it's very frustrating, and I get these kids, and I'm glad they're going out. But what they should really do if they want to make a difference, they've got to run for office themselves, because this GOP Congress is not going to give them what they want.
And it's interesting, Brett Stevens wrote in the New York Times twice now, conservative columnist, about repealing the Second Amendment in its entirety. Now, I wouldn't go that far, but I think when you look at tobacco maybe as a analog for this, we've taxed it, we've made the manufacturers liable for the outcomes. Cancer deaths have plummeted as a consequence. Tobacco is not the scourge of a generation as it once was. Guns are the scourge of this generation, and I would argue that not just background checks, but going after the manufacturers, putting taxes on guns, outlawing assault weapons, AR-15s and the likes, 9mm Glock handguns. No one needs those to shoot a deer if you're so inclined. They're just not necessary. And the fact that a mentally ill individual like this young man could get a hold of 10 guns in a year is unconscionable.
Yeah, I mean, while the president says if you see something, say something, this is the issue. They saw something, they said something, and still, a student who was expelled from this high school, a student who wasn't even allowed to go to that high school when he was a student with a backpack, needed to bring his belongings in a Ziploc bag, he was able to walk in and shoot up his own school. Phil, I want to go back to, I mentioned Don Jr. before. Don Jr. was with the president this weekend, his eldest son, urging his father, according to the Daily Beast, to hold tight on this because the NRA, without a doubt, helped President Trump win the election. Who's going to sway the president here? We know that Ivanka loves to talk a big game about being a compassionate mother. I don't know too many compassionate mothers out there who are down with this.
Well, Ivanka might be compassionate in her pleadings with the president, but he doesn't often listen to her, and we've seen that over a number of policy issues over the past year. Look, the president knows that the NRA, that gun supporters, that gun owners were a big part of his coalition that got him elected. They're going to be essential to the Republican hopes in the midterm elections this fall. They're also going to be essential to Trump's re-election. He's going to CPAC later this week, a big conservative conference. I mean, this is top of mind for him. He always plays to his base, so I would be really surprised if he did something, really moderate and progressive here on gun control. Remember, after the Sandy Hook shooting in Newtown, Connecticut back in 2012, Democrats controlled the Senate. President Obama was championing background checks. They were widely popular, 90% approval in the polls, and still that background checks bill could not get through the Senate because of the Republican opposition and the intense lobbying by the NRA behind the scenes.
Okay, Evan, you know the Republican Party better than we do. I understand this intense behind-the-scenes Republican lobbying effort. Again, I mentioned the stronghold of the NRA, yet the NRA has no interest in coming down mano a mano, face-to-face, and sitting down for an interview. Wayne, you're welcome to join me any day of the week, even on the weekends. What is it about the Republican stronghold? You talk about President Trump's base. Is his base not shrinking? When you hear from gun owners who say the NRA is not representative of who I am as a hunter or a gun enthusiast, they've gone simply too far.
No, and the NRA also has a giant checkbook that can finance a primary
No one
campaign.
else does?
Several others do, but nobody wants to get into a big public fight with the NRA. I think
so. All Mike Bloomberg's dollars, all the matching contributions are meaningless. How does the NRA have this much power?
The NRA is very good at its communications, and it is able to paint Mike Bloomberg's group as an ultra-left group. At the same time, the sadness of this tragedy, or overall, is that President Trump is a political chameleon with no real core values other than his own infallibility. He actually could bring the Republican base over if he really put his heart and soul into it and get sensible gun legislation done. But he won't. And it's very disappointing to see that. One thing that I think it could do it, and Andrew Ross Sorkin began speaking about it, is that banks and CEOs are starting to have some consciousness on this and thinking maybe we just won't allow credit card transactions if you're buying guns or buying something from a store that sells guns or high.
You are in luck. My dear friend Andrew Ross Sorkin is going to be joining us later in the hour to talk about that. It's stunning. Corporate leaders, bankers might be the ones grabbing the moral compass while politicians are off the rails. All right, Philip, give us our last word from the White House, what you think is really going to happen here.
On guns, I think they're going to be having a lot of discussions. They're going to be convening a dialogue, if you will, and I think the president's going to be very wary of coming down hard on one position or another until he really has to. But this issue is not going to go away. The pressure's there. It's only going to build because of these articulate teenagers down in Florida. They're coming to Washington later this spring to have a big march on Washington and raise attention and awareness in front of the White House. So this is a real decision for the president.
Until he really has to. 17 people were senselessly gunned down last week. You've got teenagers making their way to their state's capital in Tallahassee. They're making their way to Washington. And again, there is going to be that march in March, all about gun control. So I don't know. One could make the argument now's about time for it to happen.
Maybe the parents should go with them.
I have a feeling they will.
Here's what I know. Donald Trump is a phony, a fraud. His promises are as worthless as a degree from Trump University. He's playing the members of the American public for suckers. He gets a free ride to the White House, and all we get is a lousy hat.
Here's what I know. I guess I don't know. That, of course, was Mitt Romney thoroughly trashing then presidential candidate Donald Trump in 2016. But oh, what a difference an election cycle makes. Now, President Trump is backing Romney's Utah bid for the U.S. Senate, saying he will make a great senator and worthy successor to current Senator Orrin Hatch. Romney then tweeted out his thanks to President Trump for the endorsement. My panel back with me, Ron and Evan. Evan, I don't know or understand politics clearly. In 2016, and I realize things are different during a campaign, Romney tweeted, if Trump had said 4 years ago the things he says today about the KKK, Muslims, Mexicans, and disabled, I would not have accepted his endorsement.
Yeah.
He's cool with it now?
Well, if you read Mitt Romney's response, it was just saying thank you. And he pivoted and said the more important thing are the people of Utah, who are the voters who choose. Strategically, Mitt Romney should not be getting into a fight with the President of the United States, which could produce some Trumpista challenger to him. Would you rather, as a Democrat, have Mitt Romney in the Senate being a voice of moral clarity at a time when we sorely need it? Or would you like somebody who wears a MAGA hat? It's that simple. And Mitt Romney is that candidate of moral decency and the type of candidate I want Republicans to go back to running.
So he's just playing politics. He's going to do whatever he needs to do. And then if elected, you believe he will stand up to Trump.
You saw his announcement video. He made it very clear he's going to be standing up for what is right and good, no matter who is in the Oval Office.
I guess it depends on what you think is right and good, and at this point, what the Republican Party represents in terms of right and good. Ron, I want to share what then-candidate Trump said back in 2016 about endorsing Romney for president during the 2012 election.
I backed Mitt Romney. I backed him. You can see how loyal he is. He was begging for my endorsement. I could have said, Mitt, drop to your knees. He would have dropped to his knees. He was begging. Yeah.
Wow, wow, wow.
Listen, I would agree with Evan that Mitt Romney's going to just, thank him and move on. And I think ultimately, from his perspective, being inside is being better than outside, and having some sway within the Senate will be far more important than being an outsider and making comments, even despite the disparaging remarks made by President Trump.
Okay, then we understand what Mitt Romney's game is here, because if you're Mitt Romney, and do you remember how Mitt Romney and his industry got annihilated for carried interest? And now here we are, tax reform happened, it's still in there. And Mitt Romney's closest ties in the private equity industry, guys like Steve Schwarzman, stand right next to President Trump, smiling for pictures. What's President Trump's game here, though?
The president likes to be behind winners. And by going out and endorsing Mitt Romney and early, he's being able to say, oh, look, I got behind Mitt Romney right when he got there. So he wants to take credit for something he would really have no business taking credit for.
And this ain't Alabama.
Yeah, it's sort of like if
So then he gets behind Mitt Romney because he likes to get behind winners. Then what happens if Mitt Romney is elected and he goes after the president? Then what does President Trump do?
Well, probably the same thing that he's doing with everybody else, which is to go right back after him.
I hate you now.
Yeah,
yes.
Well, I think we'll see a lot of that. But I do agree with him. And listen, Mitt Romney's a good man. He's a seasoned individual. He's got experience in politics, in business, is a legitimate businessman who has made quite a bit of money over the course of his career. I think he would bring a very sane voice to the Senate, and probably long overdue.
And the kind of business that he comes from private equity, he actually understands infrastructure. He understands the operation side of businesses.
So, he ran the Olympics.
Funny.
And he knows how to work with Democrats. He was governor of Massachusetts, one of the more liberal states. And mind you, Utah is the most conservative state in the nation, and he's leading, and he's going to win by 30-plus points. So that says that there are still conservatives out there who will take a Mitt Romney message over a Donald Trump.
Okay, then is the Mitt Romney message, America did not want a businessman president following the financial crisis. They looked at the banking industry as their #1 enemy. They were coming off the subprime crisis. People voted then for President Trump, saying maybe we could use a pragmatist, a guy who's willing to crack the system. Now are we going to get a businessman once removed, since this idea of what President Trump would be hasn't panned out?
I think once removed is really important, Stephanie, insofar as I think Mitt Romney is now viewed more as a statesman than a businessman. And in that regard, given, kind of the moral compass that he has, the behavior that he's exhibited, I think that's more the issue than his background in private equity. It's more the fact that he's become an elder player on the Republican
I also
seat.
think very quickly that Mitt Romney, a lot of people who voted against him because of the binders full of women or the 47% comments, in hindsight realize, no, the binders full of women, it was just a guy who said something a little bit wrong.
Binders full of women. I'm pretty sure none of those women in the binders were paid $130 grand for doing nothing. Again, Michael Cohen, if you're watching, send me that check. Happy to take it. All right,
not
gentlemen.
allowed, dear.
Thank you. I'm not allowed. You're right. It's true. God, it's amazing. $130 grand. No idea why he wrote it.